Good evening all, and welcome back to Silent Souls. Tonight, we are venturing deeper into the spectral shadows of the last frontier, with 7 true Alaskan haunted stories that will freeze your blood colder than a Yukon winter. These chilling accounts come from hotel guests, park rangers, miners' descendants, and everyday folks who stumbled upon places where the veil between worlds thins to a razor edge, revealing restless spirits bound by tragedy, betrayal, and unfinished business. Pulled from eyewitness testimonies, historical archives, and paranormal investigations that were buried in official reports for years, these tales expose how Alaska's vast isolation traps not just the living in blizzards and darkness, but the dead in eternal limbo, whispering warnings to those who dare listen. If you're new here, subscribe to Silent Souls for your daily dose of authentic terror that lingers long after the screen goes dark. Smash that notification bell so the echoes of these ghosts reach you first. Now brace yourself as we descend into Alaska's haunted heart, where history refuses to die and the cold preserves every scream for... My name is Elena Ramirez, and if you'd asked me 3 years ago whether I believed in ghosts, I'd have laughed it off as nothing more than creaky floors and overactive imaginations in old buildings. Back then, I was just another wanderer in the hospitality world, bouncing from one historic inn to another across the Pacific Northwest, chasing the quiet thrill of nights spent with nothing but ledgers and the occasional late-night check-in. Places like the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, where the wind howls through the pines like the ghosts of loggers long gone, or the Fairmont Empress in Victoria, with its grand ballrooms that seem to echo with Victorian waltzes, even when empty. It's a peculiar life, one that suits introverts like me, people who find comfort in the predictability of routines, the soft glow of desk lamps, and the subtle stories etched into wallpaper and woodwork. But Alaska, that was uncharted territory for me, a place where the land itself feels alive, unforgiving, and eternally watchful. The last frontier doesn't just preserve its history, it clings to it like frost on a window pane, refusing to let go. And in Skagway at the Golden North Hotel, I learned that some histories don't want to be preserved, they want to be relived, pulling the living into their endless cycle of sorrow and waiting, as if time itself is a loop that never quite closes. It all began in the spring of 2022, when my life in Seattle fell apart like a house of cards in a gale. My ex, Carlos, was a barista with aspirations of becoming a musician, but his dreams were as fleeting as the foam on his lattes. We'd been together for 4 years, building what I thought was a stable life in a cozy apartment overlooking Puget Sound. But one rainy April evening, he confessed he'd been seeing someone else, a fellow artist from his open mic nights. "It's not you, Elena," he said, packing his guitar case. "I just need more inspiration." The word stung like salt in a wound. Inspiration? I'd supported him through failed gigs and bar shifts, all while juggling my own hotel jobs. The breakup left me adrift, questioning every choice I'd made. I needed escape, a fresh start where the memories couldn't follow. Scrolling job sites late one night, the ad for the Golden North caught my eye. Historic Alaskan hotel seeks night auditor. Competitive pay, room included. Experience with vintage properties preferred. Skagway sounded remote, romantic even, a gold rush town at the head of the Lynn Canal, where the White Pass and Yukon Route Railroad still chugs tourists up the mountains in search of bygone glory. I applied impulsively, attaching my resume with its list of creaky old hotels, and 2 days later, Mr. Harlan called. His voice crackled over the line like static from an old radio, thick with that Alaskan drawl honed by years of harsh winters and frontier tales. "Ms. Ramirez, Harlan here, owner of the Golden North. You got experience with night shifts?" I confirmed, mentioning my stints at haunted hotspots like the Sorrento in Seattle, where whispers of bootleggers still linger in the speakeasy basement. He grunted approval. Good. Nights here are quiet, but the building's got character. You'll fit right in. Ferry from Juneau. I booked my passage, packing my life into 2 suitcases. Clothes for the cold, books on Alaskan history, and a journal I'd started after the breakup, hoping to scribble away the pain. The journey north was a blur of ferry decks, slick with sea spray, orcas breaching in the inside passage, and eagles soaring overhead like omens. Juneau's misty harbors gave way to the narrower channels leading to Skagway, where the town unfolded like a postcard from 1898. Wooden false-front buildings, boardwalks bustling with cruise ship crowds, and the distant hoot of the train echoing off the granite cliffs. Harlan met me at the dock, a sturdy man in his late 60s with a beard streaked gray like mining veins, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that looked as weathered as the town. "Welcome to Skagway," he said, hoisting my bags into his pickup. "Population 200 in summer, half that in winter. Golden North's been standing since '98. The rush, you know." As we drove the short blocks to the hotel, he pointed out landmarks. The Red Onion Saloon, once a brothel where Soapy Smith's gang ran scams. The Arctic Brotherhood Hall, its facade clad in 8,800 driftwood sticks. And the trailhead for the Chilkoot Pass, where 100,000 stampeders trudged in search of Yukon gold, only a fraction surviving the trek. "Towns built on dreams and bones," he muttered. "Some say the bones don't rest easy." The Golden North Hotel rose at 3rd and Broadway, a 3-story beacon of Victorian elegance amid the rustic storefronts. Built originally as a 2-story structure on 4th and State in 1898 by the Klondike Trading Company, it was relocated block by block in 1908 to its current spot, expanded with a 3rd floor, and that iconic golden dome crowning the corner like a prospector's lucky find, E717. The facade was painted cream with green trim, bay windows jutting out like watchful eyes, and a sign swinging in the breeze. Golden North Hotel, Esther, 1898. Inside, the lobby was a time capsule. Polished oak check-in desk scarred from a century of keys and coins, brass lamps casting golden glows on wallpaper with faded floral patterns evoking wildflowers along the trail, and a grand staircase spiraling up, its banister worn smooth by countless hands. Stampeders, merchants, ladies of the night. Harlan led me through, his boots thumping on the Persian rugs. Lobbies your domain nights, balance books, handle walk-ins, patrol for noise. We've got 16 rooms, each with a story. He pointed to a framed photo on the wall. The hotel in 1899, horses tied out front, men in derbies clustered on the porch. Survived the bust, fires, even the '64 quake that shook the sound. But it's the people who linger. We climbed to the 2nd floor. My room, a cozy nook with a 4-poster bed, quilt patterned like northern lights, and a view of the harbor where steamers once docked with hopeful souls. "3rd floor's where it gets interesting," Harlan said, pausing at the stairs. "Room 23's particular. We keep it off the books most nights. Maintenance, you know." I pressed for details, and he sighed, leaning on the banister. "Mary's room. Mary Graves, 22, came here in '98 with her fiancé, Elias Thorne. He headed over the pass for gold, promised to return rich for their wedding. She waited in '23, but pneumonia hit hard. The damp, the cold, no doctor's worth a damn. Died alone October 15th after weeks of fever, C075cc Elias. Avalanche took him, or so the story goes. Body never found. Maybe he just kept going, chasing nuggets instead of love." Harlan's eyes darkened. She's seen in white, gazing out the window, shaking her fist at the town below. Guests feel chokes, hear coughs, wake to cold hands. One fella in '05 claimed she possessed him, made him search the pass for Elias's grave. E7355. Just stories, but mind it. He handed me the master key ring, heavy with brass. "Log everything. Call if needed." I settled in, unpacking books on the rush. Jack London's Tales of White Silence, Pierre Berton's Histories of the Stampede. That first night, July 25th, was calm. A family from Texas checking in late, excited for the train ride. I balanced the day's receipts, the clock striking midnight with a resonant bong that vibrated the floor. By 2 a.m., the hotel slept, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. I patrolled the halls, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through dimness like a miner's lamp in a shaft. The second floor was peaceful, but on the third the air grew heavier, a faint lavender scent wafting. Old perfume? Room 23's door was cool to the touch, unlike the others. I shrugged it off, returning to the desk for coffee. The next night, July 26th, a storm rolled in from the sound, rain lashing the windows like accusations. Guests bundled in, tracking mud that I mopped up. Around midnight, a solo traveler, Mr. Ellis from New York, requested room 23. Heard it's haunted. Thrill seeker, you know? Harlan had warned against renting it, but it was vacant, so I obliged. Ellis grinned, heading up with his camera. At 3 a.m. the phone rang. Ellis, voice shaky. Something's in here, coughing like someone's dying. I went up, finding him in the hall, pale. Inside 23, the bed was rumpled as if slept in, a wet spot on the pillow like sweat or tears. She was there, he said. White dress, waiting at the window. I searched. No one. Ellis checked out at dawn, leaving his tip. Don't rent that room. July 27th dawned clear, but tension built like storm clouds. The Thompsons, a couple from Ohio in room 22, chatted at check-in about their honeymoon, echoes of Mary's story. That evening, as the sun lingered in its midnight glow, I felt watched, hairs on my neck standing. At 1 a.m., the phone, Thompsons again, scratching at their door, sobbing from next door. Like a woman in pain, Mrs. Thompson whispered. I grabbed the flashlight, heart quickening. The stairs seemed longer, each step echoing louder. The third-floor hallway was icy, breath visible. Scratching from 23, slow, desperate. Key in lock, door open, the room dim, bulb flickering. Dust swirled, forming her, Mary in white gown hunched on the bed, coughing raggedly. Elias, she rasped, eyes locking mine. Door slammed, lock clicking. Whispers swelled, her life flashing. San Francisco birth, Elias's proposal, steamer journey, Skagway's chaos, illness's grip, death's solitude. Pain transferred, my lungs burned, coughs racking, shadows emerged, stampeders all waiting for lost things. Time stretched. I pled, he's gone. She faded at dawn, door unlocking. Harlan found me, sharing more logs. 1919 sighting of Mary Shaking Fist, 824209, 1950s possessions. I researched. U.S. Ghost Adventures, EVPs of Elias, cold drops 20 degrees, BF 3395. A seance in 23 summoned her fully, her anger at betrayal. Elias abandoned her for gold, 9CB8. I quit, but her touch lingers, a bride's eternal weight in Alaska's timeless grip. My name is Laura Chen, and for the past 12 years, I've dedicated my life to breathing new purpose into the forgotten corners of Alaska's history. Restoring weathered totem poles in the misty rainforests of Sitka, where the cedar carvings stand as silent sentinels to Tlingit stories etched by carvers whose hands remembered the feel of salmon runs and raven calls. Piecing together shattered stained glass windows in Juneau's century-old Presbyterian churches, their fractured saints and biblical scenes reassembled like puzzles from the souls of gold rush missionaries who preached salvation amid the clamor of stampeders. And stabilizing sagging boardwalks in Nome, where the splintered planks still bear the salt-crusted imprints of boots that chased nuggets along the frozen Bering seashore in 1899. It's not a career that sprang from some lofty academic pedigree or a childhood fascination with dusty museums. No. It began as a desperate hobby in the numb aftermath of my divorce in 2012, a way to fill the echoing hours of a too-quiet apartment in Fairbanks with something tangible. something I could mend when my own fractured life felt irreparably broken. My ex-husband, a geologist with the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys, had spent our marriage more wedded to seismic maps and core samples than to me, his absences stretching from weeks to months as he chased fault lines across the Brooks Range. When he finally filed papers citing irreconcilable differences, I was left with a house full of rock hammers and regret, the kind that settles in your bones like permafrost. Volunteering for the Alaska Historical Society gave me purpose, the satisfaction of seeing a rusted hinge swing smooth again after hours of patient oiling, or a faded mural on a trading post wall regain its vibrant ochre hues under the careful strokes of my brush, each restoration a small victory over entropy. As a volunteer coordinator for the Society, I've led teams across the state, from the fog-shrouded bunkers of the Aleutian Islands, scarred by the shrapnel of Japanese Zeros during World War II's forgotten northern front, to the weathered trading posts along the Yukon River, where fur trappers' yellowed ledgers from the 1890s recount fortunes won in beaver pelts and lost to the relentless gnaw of winter ice. The work is rewarding in its quiet, unassuming way. The camaraderie of fellow preservationists around camp stoves, swapping stories of narrow escapes from avalanches, or the thrill of unearthing a miner's diary tucked behind a loose plank. The meditative rhythm of sanding warped beams or cataloging artifacts that hum with the residue of lives long extinguished. But the Jesse Lee home in Seward, that wasn't just another restoration project to add to my portfolio of salvaged histories. It was a plunge into a well of sorrow so deep and unyielding that the echoes of orphaned children didn't just haunt the cracked foundations and weed-choked playgrounds. They clawed at your soul with tiny, insistent fingers, pulling you into their watery graves with whispers that promised eternal companionship in exchange for the fragile tether of your sanity, turning every rustle of wind through fireweed into a child's plea for a mother who would never return. The invitation arrived unannounced in early March 2014, buried amid a digital avalanche of funding pleas from small museums, grant rejection letters couched in polite bureaucratic jargon, and emails from colleagues coordinating supply runs for a totem restoration in Heidelberg. It was a simple message from the Seward Historical Commission, forwarded by my supervisor at the Society. Laura, looking for lead on Jesse Lee home site assessment. Post-quake ruins need stabilization before coastal erosion swallows them whole. Your track record with seismic damaged frames is perfect. 2 weeks mid-June start. On-site housing in Seward, tents or local B&Bs. Reply if interested. I'd encountered the Jesse Lee home in passing during my research dives. Founded in 1925 by Methodist missionaries as an orphanage and boarding school for Alaska Native children, displaced by tuberculosis epidemics, influenza outbreaks, and the cultural cataclysms of forced assimilation under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Named after Bishop Jesse Lee, a fiery circuit rider who'd preached to the Tlingit in the 1800s, it was envisioned as a beacon of Christian civilization for up to 100 kids, many of them Aleut, Tlingit, or Yupik, wrenched from villages ravaged by disease and poverty. The home stood on a bluff overlooking Resurrection Bay, its white clapboard buildings a stark contrast to the jagged Kenai Peninsula peaks, with dormitories for boys and girls, a chapel with a bell tower that rang out hymns across the fjord, a kitchen where communal meals forged fragile family bonds, and a playground where swings creaked with the tentative joy of children learning to trust again. But the 1964 Good Friday earthquake, the strongest ever recorded in North America at 9.2 magnitude, a tectonic fury that lasted 4 minutes and unleashed tsunamis across the Pacific, had reduced it to rubble. Seward, at the quake's epicenter, was obliterated. The waterfront scoured clean by a 30-foot wall of water that roared in at 100 Maf, homes splintered like matchsticks, the harbor's boats tossed inland like toys. At Jesse Lee, 13 children and staff perished in the surge, their bodies never recovered, swept out to sea or buried under collapsed walls. Survivors fled uphill in the chaos, some carried to safety by teachers who waded through boiling mudslides. The site lay abandoned for decades, a tangled graveyard of twisted rebar, shattered roof trusses, and foundations cracked like eggshells under the relentless assault of Resurrection Bay's tides and Resurrection Peninsula's winds. The commission aimed to transform it into an educational memorial, honoring the orphans' resilience and the dark legacy of assimilation. But first, they needed a structural assessment to map hazards and prioritize repairs before the bluff's erosion, accelerated by climate-driven storms, claimed the ruins forever. I replied affirmatively within the hour, the pull of the project stirring something deeper than professional curiosity, a resonance with my own losses, the childless ache that had lingered since the divorce. Packing was ritual, trowels and levels for mortar work. My name is Sophia Hale, and for the past 15 years, I've made a life out of unearthing the bones of America's industrial past. Ghost towns swallowed by the deserts of Nevada, where the sun bleaches wooden saloons to skeletons and the wind carries echoes of poker chips clattering on long-gone tables. Derelict steel mills along the Monongahela River in Pennsylvania, their furnaces cold but still exhaling the acrid ghost of molten iron that clings to your clothes like regret. And forgotten logging camps in the misty Cascades of Washington, where massive stumps stand as tombstones to ancient cedars, their rings counting centuries of silence broken only by the occasional chainsaw hum from modern crews. It's not the glamour of archaeology with its fedoras and whips, nor the adrenaline rush of treasure hunting with metal detectors beeping over buried coins. No, my work is meticulous, often monotonous, and always dusty, sifting through yellowed ledgers brittle as autumn leaves, photographing rusted lathes and conveyor belts frozen mid-turn, and interviewing the descendants of those who toiled there, their stories pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. As a freelance historian specializing in mining heritage, I've archived hundreds of sites for museums, national parks, and preservation trusts, turning faded payroll stubs and accident reports into narratives of human ambition, unyielding hardship, and the inevitable decline that follows when resources dry up or markets crash. But Kennecott Mines in Alaska's Wrangell St. Elias National Park? That was supposed to be the crown jewel of my career, a copper colossus that extracted over 200 million in ore from 1911 to 1938. Leaving behind a sprawling 5-story mill complex, aerial tramways that spanned yawning glaciers like spider silk, and bunkhouses frozen in time amid the jagged Chugach peaks. I thought it was just another project. Document the decay, interview the rangers, compile a comprehensive report for the National Park Service before erosion claimed more of the site. But on June 5, 2020, during a solo overnight in the old hospital building, Kennecott didn't just reveal its history, it breathed it back to life, its red rock whispers dragging me into the suffocating grip of miners who'd been crushed by the very mountain they bled dry to tame. Their unrest a symphony of tragedy that echoed through the valleys like the distant rumble of dynamite, blasts long silenced. The opportunity came unexpectedly, as these things often do in my line of work. It was late April 2020, and the world was still reeling from the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Museums shuttered, fieldwork halted, my calendar a blank slate of canceled contracts. I was holed up in my Anchorage apartment, a cozy one-bedroom overlooking Cook Inlet, where the tides slapped the shore like impatient reminders of time's passage, poring over old notes from a Silver City, Idaho project, when my phone buzzed. It was Ranger Elena Vasquez from the Wrangell St. Elias Visitor Center in Copper Center, about 120 miles east of Anchorage along the Edgerton Highway. I'd met her at a conference in Juneau 2 years prior, where we'd bonded over shared frustrations with bureaucratic red tape slowing preservation efforts. "Sophia, Vasquez here. Got a gig for you if you're game. Kennecott's degrading faster than we thought. Tram cables fraying from wind shear, mill foundations shifting with the permafrost melt. NPS wants a full historical assessment before we decide on stabilization. Or worse. Worse in Park lingo meant partial demolition, a fate that had befallen too many sites I'd loved. Kennecott wasn't just any mine. It was a national historic landmark since 1986, considered the best preserved example of early 20th century copper mining in the world. The story of its birth was legendary. In 1900, two prospectors, Jack Smith and Clarence Warner, stumbled upon a green-stained cliff in the Wrangell Mountains, revealing the Bonanza deposit, chalcocite ore so rich it ran 70% copper in places. Backed by financiers like J.P. Morgan and the Guggenheim family, the Kennecott Copper Corporation, named after a misspelling of the glacier, built an empire. 5 mines: Bonanza, Jumbo, Mother Lode, Eerie, Glacier, a 196-mile railroad from Cordova through treacherous terrain, and a company town that housed 600 workers at its peak. By 1938, the high-grade ore exhausted. It shut down abruptly, leaving the site as a time capsule. Machinery intact, papers on desks, as if everyone had stepped out for lunch and never returned. Vasquez's voice carried that ranger pragmatism, honed by years patrolling 13 million acres of wilderness larger than Switzerland. "We're seeing more structural fails. Last winter's thaw cracked the concentrator base. Need your eye for the human element. Worker logs, artifacts, oral histories from descendants. But heads up, the place has activity. Tools vanish, voices in the adits. Even our teams cut patrols short." I chuckled, attributing it to the isolation. Kennecott's remoteness breeds myths, like the red dust devils locals swear swirl with miners' spirits. "I'll pack my skeptic hat," I replied, but packed extra. My Nikon D850 for high-res shots, a digital recorder for EVPs, electronic voice phenomena just in case, my paranormal curious friend insisted, thermal camera for cold spots, notebooks for sketches, and a satellite phone since cell service is a joke in the park. Flights were grounded due to COVID, so I drove the Glen Highway east, past Matanuska Glacier's Blue Fangs, then the Edgerton cutoff to Copper Center, where Vasquez met me with a park truck for the final push. The McCarthy Road is infamous. 60 miles of gravel scars from the old Copper River and Northwestern Railway bed. Potholes like craters, washouts from glacial rivers, and moose that stare like they own the place. It took 5 hours, the Subaru rattling like it might shake apart, but the views compensated. Wrangell volcanoes piercing clouds, the Copper River braiding silver through valleys. McCarthy itself is a quirky outpost. 42 residents, no running water in winter, a roadhouse serving moose burgers, and an airstrip for bush planes ferrying hikers to the Root Glacier. From there, a shuttle up the 4-mile mine road to Kennecott, where the mill complex unfolds like a red-painted industrial cathedral. The 14-story concentration mill with its stepped levels clinging to the hillside. Power plant with smokestacks silent. Hospital a white clapboard sentinel on the ridge overlooking the Kennecott Glacier's blue expanse. Vasquez toured me. The mill's interior a maze of crushers, flotation cells and sacking rooms where ore was processed, red dust still coating beams like blood. 1916. Jumbo blast. My name is Nina Voss, and for the past 11 years, I've carved out a niche as a freelance food and travel writer, chasing the elusive flavors of the American West. Sampling bison burgers at hole-in-the-wall diners in Jackson Hole, where the elk antler chandeliers cast shadows like rack of exposed ribs, savoring Dungeness crab, fresh off the boats in Astoria's fog-shrouded piers, where the air hangs heavy with brine, and the cries of opportunistic gulls, and dissecting the smoky intricacies of mesquite-grilled quail at taquerias along the Rio Grande, where the chili ristras dangle like crimson talismans against adobe walls, scorched by the relentless Chihuahuan sun. It's a profession that sounds more glamorous than it is. Endless miles logged in a creaky Subaru with a cooler of yogurt and jerky for company, laptop balanced on knees in airport lounges where the Wi-Fi sputters like a faulty carburetor, and the perpetual hunger for stories that transcend the plate. The human tales behind the recipes, the migrations of ingredients across borders, the way a single bite can evoke a grandmother's kitchen or a fisherman's dawn haul. I started as a blogger in my early 30s, post-divorce from a sommelier whose palate for Pinot Noir outstripped his taste for commitment, self-publishing essays on culinary cartographies of the forgotten West that caught the eye of Sunset magazine and snowballed into gigs with Sava and Alaska Quarterly Review. By 2019, at 44, my portfolio brimmed with dispatches from the Tetons to the Tetlin, but the Pump House restaurant in Fairbanks. That wasn't just another dot on my map of must-try spots in the Golden Heart City. It was a descent into a historic edifice where the Chena River's drowned souls didn't just haunt the menu's fresh catch. They rose from the floorboards with grasps that chilled deeper than the midnight sun's absence, turning every clink of silverware into a ripple of submerged screams, and every sip of house red into a communion with miners whose watery graves refused the finality of silt. The lead that lured me north came in late October 2019, amid a flurry of emails pitching holiday features, mulled wine trails in Walla Walla, pumpkin spice variants from Oregon's pumpkin farms, but one subject line cut through the seasonal chaff like a filleting knife through halibut skin. Fairbanks dining, unearthed the Pump House, gold rush relic with a river's secret. It was from a PR contact at the Fairbanks Convention and Visitors Bureau, a bubbly millennial named Kaylee who'd read my piece on Nome's Dexter Roadhouse and saw parallels. Both spots born of the 1898 stampede, both perched on waterways that claimed more lives than they fed. The Pump House is Fairbanks' hidden gem, she gushed in the body. Built in 1905 as a gold dredge pump station on the Chena, now a riverside bistro slinging elk tenderloin and wild berry cobbler. But the real story? The floods. 08, 16, the big 64. Drowned miners in the workings, and folks swear their spirits linger especially after dark. Perfect for your haunted harvests angle. Haunted harvests? I'd dabbled in spooky eats before, a ghost tour tapas crawl in Savannah, absinthe tastings in New Orleans' haunted mansions, but Alaska's hauntings felt raw, less performative, tied to the land's brutal indifference rather than tourist traps. Fairbanks in November promised aurora views and -20 chills, a far cry from my usual coastal beats, but the Pump House intrigued. A National Register site since 1977, its massive steel frame once powering placer dredges that chewed the Chena's banks for nuggets, now a fine dining spot where the original boilers loomed like industrial sculptures, and the river lapped just feet from the patio. Booked, I replied, visions of byline gold dancing, Pump House, where gold rush ghosts raise a fork to the fallen. The flight from C to FA was a red-eye rattle in a 737's cattle class. Turbulence over the Gulf of Alaska jolting me awake to dreams of submerged dredges clawing at ankles. But dawn broke clear over the interior, the Tanana Valley unrolling like a rumpled brown bear pelt patched with birch groves and braided river channels. Fairbanks welcomed me with a bite, 18 degrees at touchdown, the air crisp as shattered ice. The Chena curling lazy through town like a serpent sated on salmon. I checked into the Pike's waterfront lodge, a log cabin sprawl on the river's bend, with rooms overlooking the flow where float planes bobbed like oversized ducks, then rented a Subaru Outback for the short hop to the pump house at 650 Discovery Drive, named for the '04 dredge that first powered the site, its massive buckets scooping 20 tons per minute from the China's gravels, yielding $1.2 million in gold before the easy pay dirt ran dry. The restaurant occupied the dredge's pump house proper, a hulking steel and concrete edifice built in 1905 by the Fairbanks Gold Dredging Company, its frame riveted thick to withstand the river's floods and the dredge's relentless churn. By the 1930s, as placer mining waned, it sat idle until restaurateurs converted it in 1976, preserving the original 100-ton boilers as decor, the exposed beams scarred by a century of rust and river rage, the walls echoing with the ghosts of floods that claimed dozens. Miners swept from catwalks in '08 spring surge, dredge operators drowned in the '16's ice jam break, and the '64 quake tsunami hybrid that scoured the banks, burying machinery under silt that took weeks to excavate. Kaylee met me at the door on November 14th, a whirlwind of enthusiasm in Uggs and a parka emblazoned with "Visit Fairbanks," her clipboard clutched like a shield against the 10-degree chill seeping from the China. "Nina, thrilled you're here. The pump house is the spot for authentic interior cuisine with a side of chills." The hostess stand overlooked the main dining room, a vaulted space where the dredge's heart once beat. Two massive horizontal boilers dominating like slumbering behemoths, their riveted plates pitted with corrosion. Control wheels frozen mid-turn as if the engineer had stepped away for coffee and never returned. Tables of polished walnut ringed the space, candlelight flickering on white linens, the air rich with wood smoke from the hearth and the subtle brine of river fish grilling in the open kitchen. Kaylee led me to a window booth with a view of the Chena's dark flow, ice flows nudging the pilings like insistent beggars, the opposite bank a wall of tamarack and willow shrouded in twilight fog. "The floods are the hook," she whispered, menu in hand. '08 took 3, swept from the catwalk during thaw. 16 jammed ice a mile up, burst and drowned the night shift in the pump room. 64. Quake cracked the foundations, wave rolled in 20 feet high, buried the dredge. My name is Alex Rivera, and for the past 15 years, I've been mapping the wild veins of Alaska's backcountry like a prospector chasing quartz strikes, trekking forgotten trails through the Chugach foothills, where bear scat marks the path like territorial graffiti, charting overgrown portages along the Copper River, where salmon runs still thunder against the current, and documenting the skeletal remains of old telegraph lines snaking through the Talkeetna Mountains, their poles splintered by lightning and time into cryptic runes only a hiker with a compass and a grudge against civilization can decipher. It's not a job for the faint-hearted or the map-reliant. It's a calling born from a restless soul that chafes against the grid of city streets, the kind of work that leaves you with frostbitten toes in March, and a journal full of sketches that no publisher will touch because they're too raw, too real for the sanitized guidebooks that sell in airport kiosks. I started as a grad student in geography at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, my thesis on post-colonial trail networks in the Kenai Peninsula, a dry academic exercise that ignited when I stumbled upon a Dina-Ina footpath near Hope, its berry bushes heavy with the weight of ancestors' footsteps, whispering warnings in the wind that I couldn't ignore. Now at 38, I freelance for the Alaska Geographic Data Center, producing trail guides for apps like All Trails and self-publishing ebooks on lost paths of the last frontier, each one a love letter to the land's unforgiving beauty and its capacity to swallow the unwary whole. But Badaka Road near Homer, that coastal scar etched into the bluffs of Kachamak Bay, wasn't just another route to chart for my next volume. It was a gauntlet thrown down by the earth itself, a path patrolled by shadows in sealskin that didn't just guard ancient Alutiiq burial grounds. They judged you, marked you with burns that scarred like totems, and twisted the trail into an endless loop of fog and fury until you learned the price of trespassing on ground that remembers every violation with the unyielding memory of glacial ice. The seed of the expedition was planted in late summer 2021 during a rain-soaked happy hour at the Salty Dog Saloon in Homer. A weathered clapboard dive on the spit where fishermen's nets hang like cobwebs and the walls are papered with dollar bills signed by souls who chased halibut and heartbreak across the bay. I was nursing a Rainier in a peanut shell, swapping stories with a grizzled charter captain named Mick, his face a roadmap of wind burn and whiskey, when he leaned in, breath reeking of chum and cheap beer. "You mapping that Badarka stretch, eh? Good luck, kid. Road's a bastard, built in the 60s for log trucks, but it plows right through old village sites, graves older than Cook's Landing. Alutiiq, don't forget, they send guardians." Fog rolls in thick, voices call your name, and next thing, you're looping the same mile till your boots wear through. His eyes, milky from years staring at waves, held a glint of something beyond tall tales. Fear, maybe, or the hard-won respect of a man who'd seen the bay claim boats and men alike. I'd heard whispers of Badarka before, a 12-mile dirt artery branching off East End Road near Anchor Point, hugging the bluffs where Resurrection Bay meets the Gulf of Alaska, its ruts carved by 60s clear-cuts that stripped the spruce and unearthed midden mounds, shell middens layered with bones and beads from Alutiiq villages dating back 4,000 years. The road's name derived from Badarka, a Sugpiaq word for a tidal inlet, but locals shortened it to the Bad Road. A moniker earned not just from washouts and black ice, but from the unease that settled in your gut like bad chowder, the way compasses spun lazy circles, or how hikers vanished for days, emerging miles off trail with no memory of the detour. Mick's warning stuck like burrs on wool as I nursed my beer, the saloon's jukebox crooning Merle Haggard about mamas don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys, a fitting dirge for the frontier ghosts that seemed to lean in closer with every verse. I'd been commissioned by the Alaska Department of Natural Resources for a trail assessment, update GPS waypoints for a new all-trails map, flag erosion hazards from recent storms, and note cultural sites for the Office of History and Archaeology. Badarka was the wild card, a primitive road per the maps, unmaintained since the logging boom busted in the 80s, its path weaving through state land, dotted with known archaeological zones. Bluff-top cemeteries, where Alutiiq ancestors were laid to rest with ivory harpoons and labres of jade, their graves disturbed by 60s bulldozers hungry for timber. The Alutiiq people, descendants of the Sugpiaq who thrived on Kachemak Bay for millennia, held oral histories of guardians, shadowy figures in traditional garb that rose from desecrated earth to enforce taboos, their presence marked by sudden fogs that muffled screams and left wanderers scarred with ritual burns. I dismissed it as cultural cautionary tale, the kind woven to protect sacred sites from looters, but packed extra: satellite communicator for spotty cell service, bear spray for the coastal browns that prowled the bluffs, a thermal monocular for night hikes, and my battered moleskin for sketches of petroglyphs I'd read about in UAF archives. Spirals and thunderbirds etched into basalt, predating Russian contact by centuries. The drive from Anchorage to Homer was a 3-hour meditation on isolation. Seward Highway hugging Turnagain Arms tidal flats, where belugas ghosted like submarines through the silt. Past the Kenai River's braided turquoise, where dipnetters hauled sockeye in summer frenzy. Then Sterling Highway west, birches giving way to spruce thickets pocked with glacial lakes like blue eyes staring from the taiga. Homer unfolded at road's end, a spit of land jutting into Kachemak Bay like a fisherman's thumb, its harbor crammed with trollers and the air sharp with brine and low-tide rot. I holed up at the Land's End Resort, a bluff-top perch with rooms overlooking the bay's islands, Gull, Diamond, Elizabeth, where sea otters sunned on kelp beds like furry boys. Base camp established, I scouted East End Road on September 8th, a gravel vein snaking north from Anchor Point through potato farms and muskeg, the bluff rising steep to my left, bay glittering right. Badaka's mouth yawned at mile 3. A rutted scar gated with no trespassing signs faded to whispers, alders clawing the verges like fingers testing the air. I parked the Subaru, laced boots, and shouldered my pack, 20 pounds of water, jerky topo maps, and the weight of curiosity that always pulls me deeper than wise. The road started tame, double track wide enough for logging rigs, gravel crunching underfoot like brittle bones, views of Kachemak's fjords where humpbacks breached distant, their spouts like exclamation points on the horizon. But a mile in, the path narrowed, ruts deepening from rainwash, alders arching overhead into tunnels that filtered sunlight to green gloom. Fog rolled in unannounced, the kind coastal Alaska brews from Pacific breath, thick, cloying, muffling the gulls' cries to murmurs. Whispers started then, not wind in leaves but voices, layered and lilting in a tongue like Sugpiaq, the Alutiiq language with its rolling R's and throaty vowels. Kikotut. Go back perhaps, or something older. I paused, compass in hand, needle steady at 270 degrees west, but the air hummed, electric with unseen eyes. Locals pranking, I muttered, but the road looped unnaturally. Same alder clump, same washout, fog swallowing the way ahead. Deeper, 2 miles now, the bluffs loomed higher, 200 feet of clay and scree dropping to coves where waves gnawed caves like hunger. Burial mounds poked from undergrowth, mounded earth ringed with stones, disturbed by 60s dozers that unearthed ivory combs and labrettes, now in Kodiak museums. Whispers swelled. Names weren't. My name is Marcus Hale, and for the past 14 years, I've immersed myself in the solemn cartography of loss, researching and restoring military memorials across Alaska, from the weathered granite obelisks at Fort Greely, where Cold War missile silos still lurk underground like hibernating dragons, to the bronze plaques along the Aleutian Chain's chain of forgotten battlefields, where foxholes scarred by Japanese artillery in 1942 cradle rusted bayonets, and the bleached bones of anonymous GIs shipped home in caskets too small for their dreams. It's not a path I chose lightly. It began as a way to honor my grandfather, Sergeant Elias Hale, a B-24 waist gunner who nursed frostbitten feet through the Kiska campaign's endless fog before a Zero's 20mm cannon silenced his squadron over Attu in 1943. His dog tags, the only relic, returned to my grandmother in a telegram that arrived on a Tuesday when the robins were just starting to sing. By my mid-30s, what started as weekend pilgrimages to VFW halls in Palmer, armed with a notebook and a metal detector that pinged overspent 50 cal casings, evolved into freelance work for the Alaska Veterans Memorial Commission, documenting cenotaphs that leaned like weary sentinels against the wind and compiling oral histories from the greatest generation's dwindling ranks. Their stories of Aleutian foxholes and Guadalcanal nights pieced together like quilts from threadbare memories. The pay was modest, enough for gas to the next site and a round at the Vets Club, but the purpose anchored me, a counterweight to the divorce papers that had upended my life in 2009 and the empty nest that echoed louder each fall when my daughters headed back to college in Seattle. Birch Hill Cemetery in Fairbanks, though. That wasn't just another marker on my itinerary of marble and regret. It was a threshold where the mist didn't just rise from the frozen ground at dusk. It coalesced into the vigilant forms of WBU airmen and artillerymen whose graves held more than bones and bronze stars, their spectral patrols enforcing a duty that transcended the grave, pulling the living into their eternal watch with whispers that chilled deeper than the Arctic's endless night and left you marked with the frost of unfinished oaths. The journey to Birch Hill began in the grey haze of mid-October 2020, when the interior's first hard frost painted the taiga in russet and gold. The Chena River's banks already fringed with skim ice that cracked like rifle shots under the boots of early moose hunters. I'd received the commission 2 weeks prior from the Fairbanks North Star Boroughs Parks and Rec Division, a terse email from their heritage coordinator, Ms. Lydia Grant. Marcus, Birch Hill needs your assessment. Cemeteries expanding for new vets, but the TRUE sections settling uneven. Frost heaves cracking headstones, markers shifting like they're restless. Document the layout, flag hazards, interview locals if possible. 2 days, stipend $800. Weather's turning, don't dally. Birch Hill wasn't new to me. I'd visited in 2015 for a feature on Eielson AFB's Fallen, its 20 acres of rolling slopes overlooking the Tanana Valley, a poignant patchwork of upright stones and flat bronzes, many etched with Army Air Force's wings or Navy anchors from the war that turned Alaska from frontier to fortress. Established in 1911 as a civilian burying ground, it swelled during W.P.U.'s when Ladd Field, later Eielson, buzzed with 10,000 personnel training for Pacific Ops, its graves filling with crash victims from foggy Aleutian hops and flu cases from the 1943 epidemic that claimed 50 before sulfur drugs arrived. By 1945, over 300 servicemen rested there, their plots ringed by chain link that locals swore hummed at night with the low throb of idling Pratt and Whitneys. Grant's restless piqued my interest, not structural jargon, but a hint of the uncanny that locals layered onto sites like Birch Hill. Mists forming soldier shapes at equinox dusk, cold spots freezing breath mid-sentence where no wind blew, and hands, cold, insistent, tugging coat hems toward unmarked graves as if duty called the visitor to stand vigil. I flew into FAI on a Milk Run 208B from Bethel, the Tanana Valley unrolling below like a rumpled wool blanket stitched with sloughs and oxbows, the aurora's faint green curtain twitching on the northern horizon like a veil torn by unseen hands. Rented a Tacoma at the Hertz counter, 4-wheel drive mandatory for the gravel access road, and checked into the Wedgwood Resort, a log lodge sprawl on Airport Way, with rooms overlooking the Chena, where float planes taxied like oversized waterbugs at dawn. Base established, I drove the 10 miles to Birch Hill under a sky heavy with the promise of snow. The cemetery's entrance, a simple arch of fieldstone flanked by birches whose leaves rustled like newsprint pages turning in an unseen breeze. The grounds sloped gentle up from the Tanana Flats, 20 acres of manicured turf dotted with 5,000 markers, granite uprights for the early 1900s civilians, flat bronzes for the military since '41, many etched with Purple Heart or Distinguished Flying Cross, beneath names like Pavet Samuel Ortiz, KIA Atu 1943, or Lieutenant Cole Evelyn Harper, DFC, Aleutians 1944. The W3 section occupied the northeast quadrant, a grid of 300 plots ringed by a low stone wall overgrown with lichens that glowed faintly phosphorescent at twilight. The air there thicker, as if the earth remembered the weight of young lives cut short. Day 1 dawned crisp at 22 degrees. The sun a pale disk struggling through low stratus as I parked at the maintenance shed, a cinder-block bunker where groundskeeper Hank Olson waited, a thermos of sludge-black coffee in his gloved fist. Hank was late 60s, built like a spruce stump, with a face mapped by crow's feet from squinting at horizons, his parka patched with Eielson AFB insignia from his days as a loadmaster on C-130s, hauling cargo to Thule. "Hail." Grant said you'd poke around the old section. "Careful. Frost heaves bad this year, markers tilting like drunks after last call. And the mist. Forms shapes sometimes, soldiers standing watch." My pa was one. Buried 44, crash over Dutch Harbor. Swear I see him pacing the wall at equinox. I nodded. Professional. Superstitions the soil memorials grow in. But noted his eyes. Not storyteller's sparkle, but the haunted glaze of a man who'd flown too many empty returns. We walked the grid, Hank pointing hazards. A 42 headstone for Sergeant Thomas Riley, 25th Infantry, cracked down the middle from heave. A flat bronze for Sepal and Lena Vasquez, WAC nurse, shifted 3 feet east as if dragged. Wind? I asked, leveling it back. Hank spat tobacco juice. Nah, hands do that. Cold ones, tugging like reveille. Lights dance over stones too, blue flickers where no fireflies fly. Locals avoid after dark. Even Vets Club don't picnic here. Morning passed in measurements, theodolite staking tilts, GPS waypoints for shifts, photos of inscriptions fading under lichen. Beloved son, lost to the fog, 1943. Lunch on a tarp amid the plots. Ham sandwiches from Pike's. Coffee steaming white in the chill. Hank sharing lore. Birch Hill's sentinel ground. We TRUE boys guard the gates, keep the living from forgetting. Pa said the mists their ranks reforming, patrols against the dark. 43 flu took 50 before lads docks quarantined. Markers for 'em cluster east. Cold spots freeze your spit mid-air. Afternoon unearthed more. An unmarked plot flagged by radar anomaly. Possible child-sized grave from the epidemic. Bronze dog tag half buried. Engraved, Pitt J. Kowalski, 7th Inf. I pocketed it for the VA, but as sun dipped, mist rose, not fog but vapor coiling from earth like breath from sleepers, coalescing into forms. Uniforms khaki-faded, helmets low, standing sentinel along the wall, rifles shouldered phantom. One approached. Decayed face under M1 brim, insignia faded 502nd par. Duty calls, he rasped, hand on my coat pulling toward the unmarked east plots. Frost blooming where he touched, breath freezing mid-exhale. I wrenched free, Hank crossing himself. Paratrooper, Market Garden vet, jumped wrong LZ over Atu. They pull you in, make you stand watch eternal. Dusk deepened, mists thickening to silhouettes marching circuits, whispers on wind, names, ranks, Kowalski, Harper, stand to. Lights danced, blue orbs over stones, cold spots pinning me where Vasquez's marker lay, her form rising translucent in wax skirt. Forgotten, remember. Visions, 43 flu wards at Lad, cots overflowing, masks. My name is Travis Keller, and if you'd told me back in 2016 that I'd one day run screaming from a half-built Cold War bunker in Alaska, swearing off maintenance work for good, I'd have called you a damn fool. I've been a jack of all trades in the construction game for over 2 decades, patching roofs on leaky cabins in the Matsu Valley, ripping out rotted beams from old canneries along the Kenai, even welding up oil rig platforms in Prudhoe Bay, where the wind cuts like a chainsaw. It's gritty work, the kind that leaves your hands calloused and your back screaming, but it pays the bills and keeps you moving. Alaska's full of forgotten places like that. Rusting relics from the gold rush, abandoned airstrips from WYNC, and bunkers like the Buckner building in Whittier. Massive concrete tombs that the government built and then walked away from, leaving them to rot under the weight of their own secrets. I thought the Buckner would be just another paycheck, a quick gig sealing off flooded corridors and boarding up windows in a structure that hadn't seen a soul since the 60s. But that place isn't just haunted by memories or mold. It's alive with something darker, something that hums in the walls and sings lullabies to the dead, pulling you into its endless vigil like a mother cradling a child that never wakes. It started in late September 2016, when the summer crowds had thinned out and Whittier was settling into that grey, drizzly autumn that makes the town feel like it's holding its breath. Whittier itself is a freak of nature, a speck of 200 souls crammed into one massive building called the Begich Towers, with everything from the school to the grocery store under one roof, cut off from the world by the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel that only opens on a schedule. The tunnel's a 2.5-mile beast through solid rock, shared by cars and trains. And when it closes at night, you're stuck on the peninsula with the sea on one side and sheer mountains on the other. It's the kind of isolation that breeds stories, and Whittier has plenty. Tales of drowned sailors from the W3 era, when the port was a naval hub. Or the ghosts of army families who lived in the towers during the Cold War, their kids playing in halls that echoed with submarine drills. But the Buckner, that's on another level. Built in 1953 as a self-contained city for 2,000 troops, complete with its own power plant, hospital, theater, and bakery, it was meant to be the nerve center for Alaska's defense against the Soviets. Never fully used, it sat empty after the base closed in 1960, a 6-story concrete monster squatting on 20 acres, its 1,000-foot corridors and 400 rooms crumbling under the weight of rain, snow, and neglect. I'd heard about the job through a buddy in Anchorage, a contractor named Pete who'd done some demo work there years back. "Easy money, Trav," he said over beers at Humpy's. Town hired a crew to stabilize it, board up entries, pump out water, make sure no dumbass kids get in and sue. But watch yourself, that place is cursed. Pete wasn't one for ghost stories, but his eyes got that far-off look. Felt watch the whole time, like the walls were breathing. I laughed it off. Pete was prone to cabin fever after long winters, but the pay was double my usual rate, enough to fix the transmission on my F-150 and stock up for the season. So on September 28th, I loaded my truck with tools, sledgehammer, pry bar, plywood sheets, a submersible pump for the floods, and drove the 4 hours south from Anchorage, the tunnel gate clanging open like a reluctant jaw. Whittier greeted me with its usual damp chill, the harbor fogged over, gulls wheeling like lost souls. The job foreman, a wiry guy named Lou with a Whittier tattoo on his neck, met me at the Marina bar, only spot open that late. "Buckner's a mile out, past the cemetery," he said, sliding me a thermos of coffee. 6 stories, but we're only touching the lower 3. Flooded basements, collapsed ceilings. Crew starts at dawn, but you're solo tonight. Seal the east entrance, pump the main corridor. Don't wander. Structure's unstable. He paused, lighting a smoke. And ignore the noises. Wind through the vents, settling concrete. Old army habit. I nodded, but his grin didn't reach his eyes. Over black coffee that tasted like tar, he spilled the basics. Buckner was a marvel in its day, self-sustaining with desalination plants, a bowling alley, even a chapel. But budget cuts left it half empty, a white elephant the military abandoned. Now it was a vandal's playground, graffiti and trash-littering halls where GIs once drilled. "Folks say it's haunted," Lou added, exhaling smoke. "Soldiers who died in accidents, wives who lost babies to the cold. Lullabies at night, they claim." I snorted. Superstition sells tickets to ghost tours. But as he drove me to the site, the building loomed through the mist like a concrete iceberg, windows, shattered eyes staring blank. The east entrance was a yawning maw of rusted steel doors, chained but pried open by kids. I unchained it, flashlight beam piercing the gloom, the air hitting me like a slap. Stale, metallic, laced with mold and something sharper, like wet earth after a grave's dug. The corridor stretched endless, 6 feet wide, ceiling dripping condensation that plinked like distant rain. I set up the pump near a flooded stairwell, its motor humming to life, sucking brown water into a hose snaking outside. Plywood sheets leaned against the wall. I started nailing them over doorways, sledge echoing like gunshots in the vaulted space. By midnight I'd sealed 3 entries, sweat soaking my flannel despite the chill. That's when the first oddity hit, a hum, low and rhythmic, vibrating the floor, not the pump which I'd killed for a break. I shone the light down the hall. Shadows shifted, but nothing moved. "Wind," I muttered, echoing Lou, but the air was still as death. Coffee break in the truck, thermos steaming against the dash, radio tuned to KBBI for weather updates. Clear skies, 40 degrees. Back inside at 12:30, the hum returned, joined by a creak like boots on gravel. "Footsteps," I called out. "Lou, that you?" Silence, then a shuffle, closer. Flashlight swept,